Good morning, everybody. I'm Jane Brightman. I am Director of Workforce Strategy at Skills for Care. It's really great to be with you all this morning, and what I particularly love is the dedication at 8 o'clock in the morning to come and talk about the workforce strategy for adult social care. So absolute bonus on a Friday as far as I'm concerned. So we can move on to the next slide, please. Real, thank you, and maybe the next one as well. Thanks, River. So just a little bit about who we are at Skills for Care. We're the strategic workforce development body for adult social care in England. And what we do is to make sure that the sector has enough people with the right skills and values to provide the best possible care and support. There's some stuff on the slide there about our kind of extensive workforce data and insights, and I'll cover on some of those today. Our expertise about workforce standards, skills and development, and the brand that we bring that allows us to reach the sector and system partners. And we have worked with government and other partners to turn policy into practice and practice into policy over the last 20 years, slightly more than 20 years now. So I wanted to give you some context about where we are and kind of the system in which we operate workforce-wise in England. And as probably some of you all know, we have the adult social care workforce data set. So we collect data on the workforce every year. We put two big reports out every year. One is in June and one is in October. So the data that I'm sharing with you today comes from October. We've just updated some of our data on occupational therapists and social workers. So that was sort of brand new in February. And we do periodically through the year sort of update different workforce data for you. But we have a workforce of 1.59 million. So we cover 5.4% of all jobs in England. So we're not an insignificant sector in terms of our size. 4.2% more filled posts than the previous year of us sort of collecting the data, which is good, really positive. That's 70,000 jobs. But we still have 131,000 vacancies on any given day. So that's an 8.3% vacancy rate, one of the highest across any sector really in England. That has reduced since last year, but the caveat there is that that's reduced because of international recruitment, and we've now started to see that dip because of sort of policy decisions. So we think this is possibly a positive blip, unfortunately, and we think that vacancy rate is going to be higher fairly soon. 26% of staff in the independent sector left their jobs in that year, which is high. We have 105,000 international recruits, which was up 25,000 on the previous year. And as we worked through the development of the workforce strategy, our data showed us that we're going to need another 540,000 new posts by 2040, which is 29% more than we had in this year of data. That is probably impossible. So something's got to happen, something's got to change. A little bit more context if we move on to the next slide, please, River. So some demographics for you. The one thing that jumped out to us this year in kind of collecting the data was that the gender balance in the workforce is improving. So the workforce is still predominantly female, but the proportion of male workers in the sector increased from 19% to 21% sort of year on year. This represents a record high for the first time on record. That's more than 1 in 5 of the workforce that are men. To be fair, this has mostly been driven by international recruitment, where 29% of recruits were men compared to 15% of workers with a British nationality. But we still in adult social care recruit more men than the British Army. So that's an interesting statistic for you on a Friday morning. In terms of nationality, the proportion of adult social care workers with a British nationality decreased from 83% in 21-22 to 75% in 23-24. And over the same period, the proportion of workers with a non-EU nationality increased from 10% to 20%. And in terms of age, and in a potentially positive shift this year, the average worker in the sector was just under 44, which is down from 45 in the previous year. Just over a quarter were aged 55 and over, and compared to 31% of the economically active population. That proportion has decreased from 28% in 22-23 to 26% in 23-24. We must again see this in the context of international recruitment, though, as workers recruited internationally were younger, with an average age of 34, and only 1% of internationally recruited workers were aged 55 and over. And these may not be trends that continue in future years for the reasons that I described earlier. It's worth noting for workforce planning that over a third of our registered nurses were aged 55 and over, with an average age of 48, as these workers could retire in the next 10 years. Those under 25 were less likely to work in adult social care compared to the rest of the economically active population, at just 8% of the workforce being under 25, compared to 29% in the wider population. And the workforce strategy recommends a 10-year attraction plan to attract younger generations, men and people with technical skills into the sector. So if we can move on to the next slide, thanks, River. So let's have a quick look at pay, which is really in the spotlight at the moment with the Fair Pay Agreement. So the median hourly rate for care workers in March 2024, so just a year ago, was £11, which was 58 pence higher than the national living wage at the time. The median hourly rate for care workers nominally increased by 89 pence between March 23 and March 24, but taking into account inflation, it increased in real terms by 57 pence. It's worth noting that care workers had lower hourly rates compared to NHS healthcare assistants, who were new in role at £11.67. And healthcare assistants with 2 years of experience were on £12.45. The workforce strategy recommends a people promise for social care, which aligns with the NHS people plan, and focuses on improving pay, security of income, work-life balance and career development. We know that the NHS people plan is under some kind of clouds at the moment, so it'll be interesting to see where that moves in the future, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the session. Care workers with 5 or more years experience are on average earning 10 pence more an hour than care workers with less than 1 year's experience. And this represents a slight improvement on last year's 6 pence differential, but has still dropped from the 33 pence per hour in March 2016. Although care worker pay has increased in adult social care, it's still amongst the lowest in the economy in general, with care worker median pay below the rate for the 20th percentile of £11.54. So more than 80% of jobs pay more. So the Fair Pay Agreement and the new Employment Rights Bill is an important step forward, but focusing on things like training and the infrastructure to enable proper workforce planning are vital too. Other sectors can respond to improve care worker pay by increasing their own, but it will be harder for them to compete with better paid care roles that are rewarding and meaningful and come with opportunities to learn and grow. So if we can move on to the next slide, thanks, River. So qualifications and training, over half of all staff had achieved or were working towards the achievement of the care certificate standard, and almost 2/3 of direct care staff have engaged with the care certificate. 41% of care workers held a relevant qualification at level 2 or above. This has been at a similar level since sort of 2020-21, but has fallen from 49% in sort of 2017-18. We know that among care workers who held a relevant social care qualification, 24.9% left within the 12-month period, compared to 33.2% of those who didn't hold a relevant qualification. And this is one of the reasons why the workforce strategy recommends an expansion of skills through the care workforce pathway and continued support for the care certificate. Direct care providing staff were more likely to be qualified at level 2 or 3, while those in manager roles were more likely to be qualified at level 5 or above. And the workforce strategy makes recommendations to ensure level 3 competence for direct care staff. And that word competence is key there. So we're not recommending level 3 qualifications for all direct care staff, but a recognition of their competence. And looking at apprenticeships, there were around 24,600 adult social care apprenticeship starts in 22-23, which is the most recent year that we have data on. That's 14% less than the previous year, and it's a massive 75% drop since 2016-17. Across all apprenticeships, the overall number of starts decreased by 3%. So you can see the sort of disparity there. The proportion of adult social care apprenticeship starters aged under 25 has also decreased from 25% in 2016-17 to 19% in 22-23. And in light of all of that, we make a recommendation in the workforce strategy for an overhaul of social care apprenticeships. Subsequently to launching the strategy, there have been changes to apprenticeships that the Labour government have announced, and we're starting to see some of those trickle through now with Skills England. So on to the next slide, please, River. Thank you. So why did we develop the workforce strategy? So the workforce in adult social care makes the most important contribution to the timeliness, quality and effectiveness of adult social care in England. The long-term position on recruitment, retention, training and the ability to respond to current and future needs and demands was vital, and we could see that we needed to sort of set that out in a strategy. We wanted to provide a set of proposal that could be owned and acted upon by the whole sector, but that could also be adopted by a new government. We were just on the cusp of the election at that point. And in the context of the likely challenges to wider reform, addressing workforce was likely to be the most cost-effective contribution to service improvement. So there were a number of reasons why we felt it was time to sort of get on and get that workforce strategy developed. And in the absence of the current government at the time, we led that through Skills for Care. So on to the next slide, please, River. Thank you. So how did we develop the strategy? You can see the timeline there, and you might think that was quite a short and truncated timeline, and I can tell you now it felt like it when we were developing the strategy. So we kicked off in October 2023. We had a sort of really short period of researching and planning, and we worked really closely with the King's Fund to help us to set out some research and develop a couple of reports. We did lots of interviews, and they led a number of sort of workshops and conversations to help us really sort of shape out what we wanted to develop. We set up a number of expert working groups. You can see the list of the groups there. You'll see there was a focus on things like integration, training, leadership, science, technology, AI and pharmaceuticals, and prevention. And then during that period between sort of late November and right the way through to May 24, we were in development phase. We led quite a big piece of work looking at the economic modelling with an organisation called Alma Economics. We had engagement with over 1,000 people across the sector, so people with experience of drawing on care and support, right across the workforce, care providers and employers and care workers, and engagement with the wider sector through a number of roundtables and different events. And then in the June, sort of tailing into the July, we were finalising and launching. I won't lie, we were finalising right up to kind of launch day. I felt like I needed to lay in a darkened room that day. And we launched it on the 18th of July. It was a big day. We had a great event in London, which we live streamed out as well to almost 1,000 people who watched online too. And then after that, we moved into implementation phase. There wasn't long for me to lay in a darkened room because we wanted to kick off a series of regional events pretty soon after the launch. So if we move on to the next slide. We also did quite a big piece of work looking at service assumptions. That piece of work was led by Sir David Pearson, who was, and still is, co-chair of the steering group. And he led this piece of work with a small subgroup from the steering group. And what we did was we took all of those kind of current things and we folded them into some future thinking. And we ran a series of workshops, again, supported by the King's Fund, to find out what people wanted from a workforce strategy for the next 15 years. So we looked at things like the Care Act, we looked at integration, We looked at kind of responsibility in paying for care, and obviously the charging reforms had been stopped at that point. We looked at the reform of mental health law, and that demand for social care increasing that I've described. But we also looked at some productivity ideas, as a result of sort of technology and AI coming into the future, and different types of models for delivering social care in the future. And if we just move on to the next slide, there are a few more on service assumptions. We looked at the largest increase in care and support currently with working age adults, principally people with learning disabilities, and we know we can expect this to continue. We looked at levels of safeguarding concerns, which have increased year on year since the Care Act, and again, recognising that that's likely to continue. We looked at the move to a greater proportion of care being delivered in the community, and that's likely to continue, looking at direct payments that have reduced. And then we took that sort of consistent feedback from people with lived experience, unpaid carers, and parts of the sector to which that degree that prevention needs strengthening. So we took all of those into account, and we produced a service assumptions report, which is on the Workforce Strategy website, so you can access that if you want to. Who contributed? So lots of logos and names that you'll recognise there. That's just a small kind of section of people who contributed, organisations who contributed. As I mentioned, we formed a steering group, and Professor Ona Smith, who's the Chief Exec of Skills for Care, and Sir David Pearson are the co-chairs of that group. That group really led the development of the workforce strategy up until sort of August, September time. You can see the organisations who are members of that group. And that group has now become the oversight executive. So they've stayed together. We've grown very slightly to include Sky and the Care Provider Alliance and others now represented on there. And we also have the new chief social worker who has joined that group, and the chief nurse sits on that group. So that's the group that kind of oversee, and I describe them as the guardians of the workforce strategy now. They sort of help us to implement it and make sure that they're using their influence to drive it forward. So let's quickly whiz through some examples of some of the recommendations and the commitments in the workforce strategy. You'll see there that we've put them into the three buckets. So we've got attract and retain, train and transform. So under attract and retain, you can see we've got things like pay and terms and conditions. We focused on international recruitment. We worked really closely with CQC, who sit on the oversight executive, and they took away a number of commitments in the workforce strategy, so a number of regulator actions. The 10-year attraction plan that I described earlier, we had a focus on individual employers and PAs. We looked at how to attract more leaders and how to develop our leaders. We looked at regulated professionals, and what we've described regulated professionals and our registered managers as is our small but mighty bit of the workforce. And that group in the workforce make up the smallest percentage, but we know how to reach them, and they are the group that make the most impact if we give them the right conditions and the right support. So our small but mighty workforce is a sort of ongoing theme that I'll talk to you about later. And then some work there on wellbeing and EDI, which is a bit of a golden thread throughout. On to the next slide, please, River. So under the train category, we looked at career development, competency, as I described earlier, at sort of level 3. We looked again at regulator actions, apprenticeships, which I described earlier. We looked at how training needs to be more high quality, particularly for our care workers. We looked at funding for training, and then we looked at our registered managers and the support and training that they get. And then next slide, please, River. Thank you. And then under transform, we looked at workforce planning. We looked at that training infrastructure, and the workforce strategy describes the need for national training infrastructure for adult social care in England. We looked at a 10-year transformation plan. We looked at the coastal and rural areas and how we need to ensure that we are either attracting the workforce into coastal and rural areas or attracting people that need social care out of coastal and rural areas because we're not meeting need well enough there. We looked at new roles. We looked particularly at digital skills, and we looked at a new role, which is the care technologist role, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we looked at registration of the workforce, and again, I'll talk about that later. So we can't go through a slide deck on adult social care without talking about the government's new 3 shifts. So let's do that. So you'll all have those ringing in your ears. So the 3 shifts are hospital to community, analog to digital, sickness to prevention. And we've done a big piece of work subsequently to map the workforce strategy to the new 3 shifts. So that report that we've just done, we will publish and we will pop that onto the Adult Social Care Workforce Strategy website. So you'll have access to that hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But you can see we've started to look at how the strategy is designed to enable those 3 shifts and enable the meeting of those 3 shifts. So helping to provide integrated person-centred care for people in the communities, reduce that demand on the NHS, harness and integrate digital technology, data and AI, attracting people with digital skills, using technology effectively and ethically, and then under sickness to prevention, facilitating effective social care that enables people to live better lives and reduces the number of people needing NHS treatment. And we're really keen to not sort of fall into the trap of social care is just there to meet sort of the needs of the NHS and reduce sort of hospital admissions. Adult social care is so much more than that, and it plays a vital role, but it does play a role in supporting those shifts. And so we're really keen to show government how we can do that. So moving on to the next slide. So I wanted to walk you through some of the influence of the workforce strategy to date. As I described, the Oversight Executive Group is a cross-sector group now meeting quarterly, and they govern the implementation. They are ambassadors for the workforce strategy, and they advocate for support the delivery of the recommendations. And many of them on the group hold those recommendations, so they hold the levers for making those recommendations happen. The Minister for Care, so Stephen Kinnock, announced a commitment to dementia training for social care staff. He also hosted a roundtable with social care leaders on the Oversight Executive Group, and we were able to talk to him with one voice about the importance of the workforce strategy and how it will help to transform social care. And we were able to show him quite strongly that the whole sector is behind the workforce strategy. So CQC, as I said, they sit on the Oversight Executive. They've been really instrumental in developing the strategy, but they also had strong advocacy for the strategy in their 2024 State of report, which is great. Social Work England have hosted a roundtable, and they are planning, we're working with them to plan a social workforce sub-strategy, which will sort of sit underneath the workforce strategy itself. And we're also talking to them about AI skills for social workers. Thanks, River. And then last but not least, the spending review, which we all are acutely aware will be starting to be thought about sort of this spring. We are really keen that the workforce strategy is considered as part of that spending review, and all of the Oversight Executive members are continuing to have discussions with government departments about that, and ministers. We as Skills for Care have submitted a sort of a spending review report to Treasury, which is focused purely on the workforce strategy and the recommendations and how that will help. And we have also written to Baroness Casey as part of the Casey review. We want really strongly to make that suggestion to her that the workforce strategy is done, although it was done under different circumstances, and some of the content may change. The sort of meaning and the drive behind it and the galvanising of the sector is there. That doesn't need to be redone or replayed, and we're really keen that she takes that learning and folds that into the commission. Let's move on to the next slide. Thanks, River. So subsequently to launching the workforce strategy, we took a proposal to the Skills for Care Board of Trustees, which they signed off for approval, and that is for charitable reserves to fund a workforce strategy implementation unit within Skills for Care. So we officially launched that in December. And we're now delivering on a number of work streams over 5 years. That implementation unit is quite small. It's not a huge number of people. There are 4 of us in that workforce strategy implementation unit, with some additional support across Skills for Care in terms of sort of external affairs and marcoms, etc., and research and intelligence. But what we have been set up to do is to support the sector to deliver recommendations in the workforce strategy. And Skills for Care have a number of recommendations that sit in our wheelhouse too, that we need to support and we need to kind of get on with delivering on. And so that will sit elsewhere in the organisation. And we are going back to our board at the end of this month with a number of proposals on how we'll use charitable reserves to deliver on some of those recommendations too. So I can't say too much here at the moment because they haven't approved that yet, but fingers crossed I'll get the nod at the end of this month, and we'll be able to tell you more about those. They're quite exciting. So let's have a look at some of the recommendations that are in progress or have been completed, which is really exciting. So the National Care Forum have kicked off the Care Technologists pilots, and that's really to sort of test and roll out support for creating a new care technologist role. The care technologist role really first started life in Scotland, and they have been running the care technologist role for a while now. So they've got quite a lot of research and evidence into its impact and how it best works. So we've started to take some of that learning, and NCF are kind of leading on that recommendation. They will be rolling out a number of pilots across England, and so they'll be looking for people who are interested. So if you are interested, let me know and I can put you in touch with them. ADAS and us have begun discussions on the programme of development for new DASs. We have been running a programme for new DASs for a while as Skills for Care, but we did quite a big review with ADAS and the LGA on that programme, and we determined that it was really better suited to aspiring directors. So we've sort of changed that now. We're rolling that out as an aspiring directors programme and focusing on what we can develop for, sorry River, can we just go back? What we can develop for existing DASs and new DASs. We have worked with OHID and the Royal Society of Public Health on some new e-learning around prevention for adult social care, and that's been launched. And you can access that on the website. And then the Care Workers charity hosted a focus day on wellbeing during Professional Care Workers Week back in September. Professional Care Workers Week is an annual event, and the Care Workers charity will be running that annually, which is great. Next slide, please. Thank you. So some more recommendations in progress or completed. So the revised statutory and mandatory training guide has been launched. So we have updated the old guide, and CQC and I are working together on sharing that across the sector. What we've done is we've really sort of pared back that list of training that care providers need to do, and we've made it much clearer. So what we're sort of intending by that is that care providers find it easier to plan and manage training. They don't have to repeat training as often, and they can use those sort of saved budgets to put in different types of training. So we're hoping that that will have a good impact. As I said, we've had commitment from Stephen Kinnock to ramp up dementia training for the workforce. That was made in the House of Commons, and we're working really closely with the Alzheimer's Society, who are leading on the mandatory dementia training recommendation. We're working with Newton Europe and some other partners to scope a project focusing on using AI to improve workforce productivity. That will be particularly in local authorities. So we'll be looking for local authorities who might be interested in kind of taking part in that project. and we are currently supporting phase 2 of the social care workforce race equality standards, or the RES as you might hear them called, with 83 local authorities signed up across all regions in England, which is really exciting. We're just planning quite a big event in London for May as well, with the London Mayor sort of opening that event. So we're really excited about where the RES work is going. So on to the next slide, thank you. So I wanted to pull out for you some of the changes that we're already starting to see in practice across integrated care boards, local authorities and regional ADAS groups. So that I've just pulled out a few just to kind of whet your appetite really, but we've got tons of these, and we are doing quarterly progress reports, which we're starting to share with government and with the Oversight Executive, and we'll start to publish those on the website as well, so you can access those too and see what's happening. So the Southwest is becoming a shining, shout out to anyone from the Southwest today, is becoming a shining example of partnership working and taking that sort of joint responsibility for the strategy. So in February, the ICB agreed to formally recognise the Workforce Strategy Implementation Group as an ICB subgroup, and that includes representatives from across the ICS, essays in the Southwest, regional NHS England, local authorities, ADAS, etc., and the Southwest Care Provider Network and Care Association. So that's a really great example of coming together and making the workforce strategy happen across a whole region. In Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, they have just launched a Social Care Academy pilot, which is a virtual learning offer. And it offers a variety of courses for all roles and information to support careers in care. Since they launched in January, we had that kind of early data from them, and they already had 220 active users, which exceeded their target of 90 active users for the first month. And Surrey Heartlands ICB also runs a successful academy and have recently launched a career ambassador programme to promote care careers. So again, if there's areas there that you're interested in, we can support you there. A practical example of good practice from Suffolk and North East Essex ICB, who are working with partners to produce a series of videos and supporting resources around flexible working and menopause for care providers. And the aim is to show employers how to improve staff wellbeing and retention. Many local authorities, some examples include Essex, Hertfordshire and Oxfordshire, continue to map their local strategies to the National Workforce Strategy. And Telford and Wrekin Council have said that the strategy helped with their recent CQC review, and Walsall Council has recruited an interim workforce lead to develop their strategy and conduct training needs analysis, which is fantastic. And NHS England, East of England, are looking to extend elements of their people promise offer to the social care sector in ICS footprints, with the most activity taking place in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough ICS, and elsewhere North East ADAS and the ICB are looking to pilot the people promise with 6 social care employers. So we're really excited about that one. We think that the people promise is really important for social care too, and we are interested in not reinventing the wheel and having a separate people promise, but where we can fold into the NHS people promise. So moving on. Thank you. So really what I want to leave you with is some key messages, and these are the things that I want you to take away with you today, really, if nothing else. So those are that the adult social care sector is already collaborating to progress and implement many of the recommendations in the workforce strategy. I've described some of those today, but many others have already kicked off. Just under half of the recommendations and the commitment in the strategy need some kind of government support, although only just over a quarter are for government alone. So not all of them, which is really important to say. This is a sector strategy, and the rest are commitments from the sector or recommendations for organisations outside of government who are really committed to getting on with those. We continue to engage with colleagues in government as we implement the strategy to address the challenges facing the sector, and we really hope that the government are going to see the strategy as crucial to the Casey Commission, and we've started to describe it as a down payment on kind of that bigger reform in the sector and the creation of the National Care Service. So my email address is on there if you have any questions about the workforce strategy, or if you want any further information or would value any follow-up conversations. But also I know that River and colleagues at Panoramic are happy to sort of field those too. So I will stop there